This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, Charlie, good luck.
Thank you. You got your voice on the recording first. Well done. We'll get the edit team to do something about that.
Okay, then we'll start. I think we have more people joined, and I'm sure that there will be more people joining as we start. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Network to Connect, a series of networking events by the corporate group that aims to provide a free networking platform to learn, network, connect, and collaborate for business growth. Today, our session is about Lean Six Sigma, the smart way to change. And our presenter today is Dr. Charlie Sifford. We will give a bio about himself, but before we start talking about the session, we would like to inform everyone that as a corporate group, we will be in the next quarter, you will see a couple of new, I would say, kind of the missions, business missions that some would be virtually and some would be physically, that we will launch for the last quarter of this year. So please follow us in our social media to see the most updated and dates of those sessions that we will do, plus the next events that we'll do for the month of October. Please do take the Network Connect survey at the end of the sessions and follow up that we will send it to everyone. We will have the Q&A session after the speech and the presentation of Dr. Charlie for the 40-minute session today. We'll have about 20 minutes for the question and answers. And you can also write your questions and chat on the chat window, and we can take it there. Some general points for attendees. Please know that your microphone should be on mute to allow everybody can hear clearly. And please post any questions again if you have in the chat window. The recording will be done on this session and will be available on YouTube. We will place it after the webinar. And do make sure that you have your email ID dropped on the chat window. At the end of the session, one of the lucky attendees will receive a small gift from us today. Just as a way of introduction, Dr. Charlie is an international recognized master black belt, author, leader, and coach with over 20 years of experience in business analysis, business governance, performance improvements. Over his illustration career, Dr. Charlie has helped in developing millions of pounds in benefits to engineering manufacturing companies in aerospace, defense, financial systems, oil and gas sectors, and a few others. He's a Bachelor of Science degree honors with the MBA, PhD, MBCA, CITP, and he's currently the managing director of Charlie Consulting Limited, which is based in Dubai. So the floor is yours, Dr. Charlie.
Thanks, Adil. I just need someone to give me presenter privileges. I love this.
Yeah, they will put the slides for you now.
Fantastic. So hopefully you can all see that title screen. So let me just say thanks very much, everybody, for joining this webinar. I hope you find the discussion and some of the topics that I present today thought-provoking and useful. Adil's gone through a lot of the rules for when we interact today. Primarily, if you have any questions, use the chat button at the top, and we'll go through these at the end. If anyone has got a burning desire to raise an issue and a point of clarification, then feel free to unmute and join in, but I'd prefer that we try and get to the end of the presentation, because hopefully the questions that you may have at the start will be answered somewhere within the body of the text. One of the things I will point out is that, and for the people online who know me, my slides tend not to be just bullet lists, but they tend to be diagrams, and sometimes they can be quite busy. I did that so you can look at the diagrams and we can think about things differently as I try and present some new ideas and some different concepts. If anyone would like to know more about Lean Six Sigma at the end of this presentation, feel free to contact me at this email address. If they have got any specific business issues that they think I can help with, and would just like to have a discussion about some potential options, please get in touch with me. And again, if anyone wants a copy of this presentation, send me an email and I'm more than happy to share that. So what are we going to do during this webinar? What I'd like you to think about, because I know that there's lots of people with different levels of Six Sigma experience on this call, is to try and think a little bit differently about how we address problems, how we drive improvement. And by doing that, what I'd like to do is think about the current COVID-19 situation. And instead of thinking about the health of your business, I'd like you to think about how do you manage your own health. What kind of things do you think you would like to do? What kind of things do you think you would care about? And then once we've got a common understanding from a completely unrelated topic, I'd like to pull us back into the Lean Six Sigma world and show you how the approaches for fixing problems, for driving improvement and managing a business is very similar to that of managing your health. So in terms of this first busy slide, let me kind of direct you to the different quadrants on here. What I'm looking at here is just a diagrammatic view of how would you care to manage your own personal health. From top to bottom and left to right, there are different dimensions. So in the bottom left-hand corner, self-health, it's the one where we'd expect to see the highest impact potentially to your health and the highest risk. And that's one of being very reactive and looking for self-help. It's a situation where you don't really look after your health, you smoke, you drink, you don't exercise, and when something bad happens, you self-diagnose, take some pills, and hopefully in the morning, everything gets better. If I take that self-help model and try and move it to step 2, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, it's probably something that's more familiar to us all, that whenever we have a major health issue, a pain, some symptom that worries us, we go and seek help. And when we seek help, what normally happens is a doctor will do a diagnosis and we may require further treatment, we may require further examination. And then at the end of this, we would hopefully have some kind of recovery and go back to full health. The top left-hand corner is a slightly different view, which is we probably don't need to go to hospital or to a doctor as much because we take preventative attempts to look after our health. We've got a healthy diet, we exercise, we maybe have things like biometrics on our smartwatches, and we track certain things. And only if we see deviations in that, we might take self-help. So blood pressure, blood sugar levels increase, we might adjust our diet. If I move to the fourth level, the health plan and living side, it's one that's proactive and it minimizes risk, but it also seeks help from experts. This is the one where we proactively take precautions to look after our health. This is one where we try to make sure that everything's working well, and only in the instance of something not working well do we then seek help from medical professionals. So if I can apply this diagram in terms of COVID-19, quadrant 1 is very much a case of the people who don't self-isolate, who don't socially distance, they don't wear masks, they are happy to mix in groups, and they increase their chances of contracting the virus. And when they do contract the virus, they may decide to take 2 aspirins and hope things will be okay in the morning. The bottom right-hand corner from a COVID-19 perspective could be that people don't really take any precautions, but when they do get the symptoms, they'll at least go and get formal testing. They may require further examination from a medical professional, and hopefully they can self-isolate and improve, but they may ultimately end up in A&E and on a ventilator. So you can see that while 2 is better than 1, 2 is pretty severe. The quadrant 3 from a COVID perspective really is a little bit like us wearing face masks. We socially distance, we observe all the rules in terms of the number of groups we can be around and so on. The idea here that we try to prevent contracting the virus, but there is still an issue here that if we think we've caught it, rather than act on the symptoms by seeking help, we maybe self-isolate, we maybe take some pills and hope things will get better in the morning. Quadrant 4, I think, is where we want to be. It's where we take all the necessary precautions to avoid bad stuff happening. But when it does happen, we seek the right medical help. And because we've had an avoidance strategy, the chances are that when we do develop symptoms, they won't be as severe as, for example, in quadrant 2. So the opportunity for recovery will be better. It'll be more complete, there'll be less of an impact. So we have a choice in terms of our personal health in how we want to manage that and how we want to avoid problems and stay as healthy as possible by being proactive, but also make sure that if anything does happen, we seek the help through professionals who can diagnose the issues that we face and give us the right kind of remedial action and the right kind of medication and treatment. So what can we do? We've talked about different strategies about being proactive or reactive, but what is it we can do? Well, it's very simple. We can stop doing things that put us at risk. So stop meeting in large groups, stop being in close proximity with others. There's things that we can do better that we're doing already: washing hands, cleaning surfaces, maintaining social distancing. And there's other things that we can do that would make us even safer. So wearing face masks, track and trace applications on phones, developing a vaccine and using the vaccine. There's also other things that we can do which may or may not help. For example, don't overeat, don't drink excessively, don't smoke, look after your basic health. That has got an impact on COVID, although it's a direct, indirect impact. We can always exercise more. We can improve our mental state by reading more, getting involved in education. In terms of things that we do already, we can eat better. We can have better diet in terms of fruit and vegetable, get a good night's sleep. The big issue that we've got here is that in terms of COVID, we know that there is a clear threat to our health, and there's things that we can stop doing, there's things we can do better, and there's things that we can start doing. But what we've got to do is make sure that we take the time to do the right things at the right time. Otherwise, we increase the risk of contracting the virus, and we increase the risk of the potential negative impact to our health. So I hope what I've tried to do just now is give you a little bit of a thought about your physical health with a clear and present danger that exists today, and think about now, if you want to go after things and improve your own health, why would you not take a similar strategy and approach to the health of the business and the livelihood of you and your family and your employees? The number of challenges that we face in business has always been there, and it's kind of huge. The area in the yellow circle here just highlights some of the issues. Businesses have always struggled to make sure that they can have their internal efficiencies as slick as possible, the best ways of working, the best skilled workforce, the best processes, and so on. They need to make sure that they understand their customers well and can meet the demands of those customers in terms of the specification of products and services, the on-time delivery, the quality of these, and also the maintainability of these, the lifetime of these products and services. Now, impacting all of this is performance of suppliers who may provide materials, and also the changes that competitors make in their products and services that might impact our own business sales, profitability, and cost. If I look at a broader issue, there's always been an issue of what we call Pestle, the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors that could always impact a business. So things like pollution control and trying to reduce the carbon emissions in business. That is an environmental concern that is increasingly impacting businesses. But if I look around at what I can see from COVID, there's a whole range of things from these broader issues that lie generally outside the control of a business that can impact a business. So, for example, the economy, we've seen significant impacts across the world in terms of staff being furloughed, companies slowing down, and increased borrowing by countries that is impacting GDP and increasing unemployment. We've seen legal changes in terms of restrictions being placed on individuals, but also restrictions being placed on movement between countries. If I go back to the yellow circle here and think about the things that are impacting us, we're seeing changes in the customers in terms of their needs for demand and convenience, for flexibility, new channels for sales, and getting access to products and services that they had in the past. Suppliers are under greater pressure because of some of these macroeconomic factors in terms of being able to move materials across borders. Their delivery and availability of materials is changing, it's becoming more variable, and their prices are increasing. Competitors are becoming more innovative. So if they can't do business one way, they will find a way of doing business another way, and they need to adapt and change. And if they do that, become more successful, then our businesses begin to suffer because we lose market share, we lose customer accounts. And even internally within the business, we're seeing things like changes in operating hours, changes in utilization because people are no longer working the hours that they needed to work. The equipment that they've got is no longer being utilized the way that it should. We've got different ways of working. We've got different ways of physically being separated in our working environment. So what I'm trying to suggest in this slide is companies have always had a pressure to change because of a number of different forces. Some of these fall within this yellow circle of the traditional business factors, which are to an extent controllable. And there are always other factors in this broader bluer area, the macroeconomic factors, which are less in control, but companies still have the ability to respond to. And what we've seen this time with the COVID-19 pandemic is that it's not just one or two of these changes that have occurred, but we've been exposed to so much change in such a short period of time that the need for companies to change more effectively has never been more urgent, never been more acute. So we have some options here. We can follow some of the discussion topics that we had earlier in terms of people's individual health. Do nothing till something bad happens. We can react when something happens and try and fix things ourselves. We can wait until something bad happens and then maybe get help from someone who can maybe provide a more diagnostic approach to helping us. Or we can be proactive to try and avoid a lot of the problems, but when they do occur, we can try and fix them. The limitations with trying to seek help, though, is that sometimes there isn't a sufficient level of knowledge to drive improvement or fix problems within a business. Sometimes businesses don't have a full knowledge of certain things that would impact if they make changes in one place, would they work elsewhere? So for example, if I need to increase sales, I can always hire more salesmen. But if I don't have the manufacturing capacity to build the products that the salesmen are selling, my sales will never increase. I've just added cost to my business without seeing the end result. What we're also seeing is that there's a limited level of cash available, not just for consultancy, but just cash flow is being squeezed as businesses try to survive through this pandemic. And the problem is that the problems are here now and they've got immediate time pressures. And we have basically two options. One is to try and weather the storm or try to fight through the storm and try and do something better. And by not tackling things properly, what we can see is an impact in unpredictable sales. We can see higher costs to the business. We'll see profits being squeezed. Where we've seen people make investments, we might see them not having the same return on these investments. Sounds like someone's switched their microphone off and pouring a drink. Could you put yourself on mute, please? What we've also got is sometimes some businesses, it's not clear how they're going to sustain themselves in the future, putting their employees' future at risk. So there is a huge amount of challenge in the world today, more than we've ever had. We've talked about the personal health of individuals and how you would want to look after yourself. With all this change going on and with all these challenges, what do you think you'd want to do from a business perspective? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Stop doing the things that don't add value, do the things that add value better, and start doing the things that improve performance that you weren't doing before. Exactly the same as the things we talked about with your personal health. But in a Lean Six Sigma world, we've actually got methodologies that have been proven to deliver value here that tackles each of these areas. Stop doing things that don't add value. That is lean. That is where we eliminate waste, we remove redundancy, and we focus on driving value. If we think about what people call Six Sigma, or sometimes DMAIC, which follows the define, measure, analyze, improve, and control steps, what we try to do there is to standardize, so everybody's doing the same thing, simplify and improve. Standardization is hugely important. If you've got 100 people doing the same job, but 100 different ways, you will never get the benefits of fixing something once because you've still got 99 other ways of trying to fix it. Simplifying it means that people are more likely to apply the process and the approach in a consistent way. And then once you've got that consistency, you've got a great basis to drive continuous improvement. And then the third option is a design for Six Sigma or a DMADV model, which starts to look at how do you do things that you may not do already. And another way of looking at DMADV or design for Six Sigma is product development. Gather requirements, develop designs, do development and testing, and then releasing a new capability. So at the bottom of this slide, what I've done is I've tried to put the very high level phases of each of these methodologies together. And you can see that they are very closely aligned. They actually still try to tackle the same things, but they're focused on slightly different things in a different way because they're trying to tackle slightly different problems. But in a Lean Six Sigma environment and with a Lean Six Sigma practitioner, it is actually pretty simple to combine all of these things when you're trying to fix a business problem. So at the same time, you can stop doing things that don't add value, do the things that are good for you better, and start doing the things that you weren't doing before. In this diagram here, what I've tried to do is show you just a little bit more detail about the consolidated methodology at the top. And if I could just talk you through it, first of all, we identify where the opportunities are, but the next step where we go through define and commit really is about defining the problem in a way that everybody that's involved has a consistent understanding. So there's no ambiguity, there's no distortion, we know the problem we're trying to fix. The next step at measure and prioritize gets us to go and find data to do an analysis to really understand the truth of the current situation we're in. Or if we don't have the information, we will do an analysis through things like process mapping or whatever. But the objective here is to establish a truthful, quantitative view of what the current state looks like. Now, during the measure and prioritize phase, we will identify symptoms, but they may not be the actual causes of the problem. So what we then do is we take these symptoms and go into the next phase and do a root cause analysis to find the underlying causes to the issue. And once we understand the underlying causes to the problem, we can put in place the correct solutions, verify them before we implement them through improve and control. This is very, very similar to what you would experience if you went to see a doctor if you had a problem. In define and commit, you'd go and see the doctor, you'd explain high level, I'm not feeling so well, I've got these high level symptoms. He would ask lots of questions. At measure and prioritize, he would give you an examination. He may want to use some equipment, take your blood pressure, maybe take blood samples, and try to work out what the symptoms are so you can then think about what the potential causes are. If it's a simple issue, then the causes will be found. If it's not such a simple issue, it may require further analysis. Go for an X-ray, go for an ultrasound. But once the analysis is done and the causes are understood, the doctor is in a position to identify the best solution to improve your health, address the problem, and then once the corrective action's been taken, you've had your treatment, your condition will be monitored. So the diagram at the bottom tries to explain how the process gets us to focus on what's important. Initially, nothing's off the table. We're trying to understand the problem. Everyone has a voice. We want to do what we think makes sense. But when we do that, we'll ask certain questions. We'll think about where we can get information. And by doing that, we can begin to home in on certain things that we want to measure. When we measure and we understand symptoms, we can then begin to understand that there are common causes that causes the symptoms. So one cause may actually result in 5 or 6 different symptoms. So again, our focus comes in a little bit more. Once we understand the causes, it may be that a single solution might address many causes. So again, our focus comes in again. So at the end of this process, what we found is that we begin to focus on all the things that are relevant and important and address them, and all the things that are less relevant or irrelevant, we move to the side. By following this approach, what we do is we end up with the best fit solution to a problem. Now, some common issues are that when people try to fix a problem, they never bring that scope in. So there's lots of wasted effort while people are trying to fix the problem, and at the end, we end up with such a complex solution that it never works. Or because the work becomes so complex, we never get to the end game. An alternative is that we may have this pink box in the middle, which is actually someone's ideal solution at the start of the problem. And because they had the solution way at the start, they will make sure that that's the solution that we develop at the end, and the process is just there to verify. Unfortunately, the solution probably won't be a good fit. It probably won't address all the issues, and the results it's going to deliver will be disappointing. So in this way, what we've got is a methodology that makes us efficient in solving problems by understanding the problem, identifying the symptoms, establishing the causes, coming up with the solutions, and then verifying that the solutions work in exactly the same way as a doctor would treat you for an ailment. Just to reinforce that very briefly, here's a high-level view again of the phases, but underneath each of the phases, Six Sigma practitioners have got access to a range of different tools and techniques to help break down problems into more manageable chunks and to do analysis in different places. But the critical element here is that the output of one tool should become the input of the next one. And by doing that, what we find is that we remove any opportunity for bias, for subjectivity, and we continue to focus on facts and data and logic to make sure that we arrive at the same position. And by doing that, we're also in a better position to bring the rest of the stakeholders with us, because everybody else understands that we're going in the right direction for the right reason. So what we've done is we've talked about health. We've talked about the massive need for managing change because what we're facing in today's world. And we've talked briefly about the structure of a Lean Six Sigma methodology that is very much like a medical doctor's way of diagnosing the problem. But the reality is that in a business, we don't have one problem to face at a time. We've got many problems. So for businesses, they've got to consider some simple questions. First of all, in terms of their business strategy and goals, what are the things that they really care about? What are the most important things that we need to focus on that's going to help the company most? Second thing is opportunity mining. Now that we know what's most important, where do we find the opportunities that will have the biggest impact? Once we understand where we think we're going to apply our focus, there's some very simple questions that happen next. Who's going to fix the problems? Well, we can bring external consultants in, but ideally, the people doing the job are the ones who best understand how to fix it. But with a little bit of Six Sigma training and coaching, they might end up being a fantastic resource in a business to fix the problem today, but it'd be a resource that can fix problems in the future. How are they going to fix it? Follow the broad methodologies that I've explained earlier, a diagnostic approach using facts and data and logic to arrive at the best solution as efficiently as possible. And when are they going to deliver? Apply simple project and financial management techniques to make sure that we know how long different projects would take, who needs to be involved, what the key milestones are, what the cost would be, and what the subsequent benefit would be. What the areas that I've got in red here are generally the ones that any organisation should consider first. But as you build up a capability of fixing problems and become more competitive, one of the things you may want to think about is expanding that capability. So moving from 2 or 3 projects to drive improvement in your business to hundreds would require you to have a more effective screening and prioritisation mechanism. A triage system, if you like, that says we're going to focus on the areas that are sickest first and make sure that we drive them. Portfolio management is a way of saying we've got the right balance of things. So I mentioned before the idea of I need to drive sales, so I'm going to hire more salesmen. But if I don't have a manufacturing capability to deliver on that higher demand, I will never drive higher sales. So portfolio management makes sure that there's a balance of improvements across the business that is improving the value stream and the flow through a business and not causing any unnecessary log jams or creating any unnecessary barriers. And have stronger governance. Have a way of saying that when we roll all these projects up together, all these improvements in different areas, we know that it's contributing to the top and bottom line of the business, which takes us back to our business strategy and goals. So let me just very quickly give you 3 simple case studies. There's a lot of information on these slides. If you want a copy of this presentation, I'll let you read them at your leisure. But let me just reinforce some of the messages that we've talked about. This case study here was for a company that had a fairly expensive product, technological product that needed to be integrated into a building framework. If you can imagine, it's a little bit like a wind farm, although this wasn't a wind farm business. What happened was that every competitor basically had the same compliance solution. So when bids were being tendered, the only differentiator was price. And this company found it was running more expensively than most of its competitors. So as a result of that, an analysis was conducted in a number of ways. There was analysis on the efficiency of the labour in order to deliver and develop the product. There was an analysis on the product and bill of materials, and there was an analysis done on what was a fairly large area of subcontract work. And what we found in the analysis was that engineering costs were a lot higher than they should have been. There was a huge amount of subcontract cost and different subcontract layers, and this existed primarily in civil works. So what was happening was company was subcontracting civil works to one company, which then subcontracted to another, to another, to another. And of course, all these other layers had their own markup. We found that the product was overspecified. There was elements in the bill of material that the customer didn't care about, but the company was bearing cost. We found that some supplier costs were high, and also in part of the contract, there was a very large amount of money being held back as a management reserve, a risk buffer. So the solution was pretty simple. The labour was streamlined to reduce indirect labour, primarily around engineering. The subcontract management layers were significantly reduced to take cost out. Suppliers were resourced or renegotiated, and the risk buffers that were in place were reduced and improved risk management put in place. In effect, what the company did here was do the analysis and stop doing the things that didn't add value. This was a great example of applying lean principles in an environment to become competitive. The second of the 3 case studies is about a business that did testing for products for its 2 owners. The 2 owners were 2 large international companies, and those 2 large international companies treated this company basically as a quality department. They would book slots for testing of their products, but then make changes at the last minute. And the president of this company described him trying to manage those testing slots as playing a game of Tetris. He had strange shapes that were coming down. He had to try and fit them into strange spaces, and he was never given the chance to be successful. As a result of that, the utilisation of his assets and his staff were being undermined. The business therefore then tried to get business externally away from its owners to offset the damage being caused by the owners. But what this did was it actually caused greater turmoil in the business. So the company underwent a full business diagnostic to try and find out where all the issues were. And there were a lot of issues. But what we found was there was no point in us trying to fix the operational problems, because the management problems and the management controls were probably bigger. So if any operational improvements had taken place, we would have been in a position where management would never have seen it. So we identified things like identifying where to engage customers and drive orders more effectively and more predictably and improve customer relationships. We looked at the cost management, which was supported by an archaic financial system. And because of this archaic financial system, financials were being reported for a particular month 2 to 3 months later. So all the company could ever do was report performance, not manage. We looked at their pricing, and what we found was that their cost recovery mechanism for pricing was not reliable. So we were seeing hugely variable prices being given to customers for the same work. And we found that the cost recovery mechanism wasn't adequately supported by pricing, which resulted in around about a 5% negative EBIT for the company at the end of each year. The way that the assets and investments were being managed meant that the assets were aging, not being replaced, not being maintained, and it was putting the future capability of the business at risk. And over the top of all of this was a strategic framework that basically had a 1-year look ahead. The strategic plan talked about 1-year performance and 4 years after. And what happened in the next year was it focused on the next year, and the next 4 years all moved out. So it was only ever a 1-year look ahead with 4 years of promises, and those 4 years of promises afterwards were never delivered. So the company wasn't managed badly, but it needed management improvements in lots of different areas. And that's exactly what we did using a Diagnostic Approach. The result of this was that we were able to get all these areas under control, but we brought them under the banner of a better strategic framework, which was supported by a balanced scorecard and supporting application that gave management information that they needed. The result was spectacular. Within a year, the revenues had increased by a further 50% for the company. From a break-even EBIT, they went up to around 20% EBIT. They were able to generate sufficient cash to pay off a loan to their owners. They actually achieved an approval from their board to get 5 times higher CapEx expenditure for growth than they'd ever had, and for the first time in 10 years, they were able to give their employees a pay increase. That was an example of using the Six Sigma element of improvement. Take what they do, find ways of doing it better. And in the final case study, I'm going to talk about a fabrication company that was under pressure from competitors in the Far East. Those competitors had access to cheap steel, they had access to cheap labour, and the company's management had a choice. They could either try to copy the competitors in the Far East, or they can find a different way of working. And they chose a different way of working. They said that they were going to start finding digital solutions to disrupt the market. So what they did was they did an analysis of all the major cost drivers, and they were involved with a number of organizations, partners externally, and doing some work internally to try and work out what they could do differently. And they focused on two areas. First one was they looked at the existing utilization of their labor and their equipment and said, is there something we can do differently? So one example was that they looked at how power was being used in the yard, and they found that there was power droppages before breaks that didn't fall nicely in line with when the allocated break time was. So we weren't utilizing the labor as effectively as we should. Equipment that was expensive wasn't being utilized effectively. It was sitting in the yard not moving, with drivers sitting there sleeping in the cab. And we had people booking time on a paper-based system, but sometimes it was unreliable because some of the people in the yard were bringing their family in to do the work. So we weren't getting the same quality of work. Different people were booking in different times for different work. So they introduced a facial recognition system. On top of that, they tried to find ways of completely replacing people with automation. So they tried to do that in terms of robotic welding, and they've also done it in terms of finding automated ways of doing non-destructive testing by gathering huge amounts of data and letting artificial intelligence and machine learning find better ways of us working and getting higher quality products more predictably. This was an example of design for Six Sigma. It was a case of we didn't do these things before, we got to find new ways of doing it. And the result was that the company started to win bids based on cost competitiveness because they were able to factor the cost reductions that these new ways of working were able to introduce. And it now gives them potential competitive advantage in the market against those competitors in the Far East who are still relying on huge numbers of people working at very low costs. So that's the end of this webinar. From my perspective, what I've tried to get you to do is think about how would you normally manage your health? Clearly, the best way is be proactive. Think about your health, but if something happens, go to a professional who can provide a diagnostic approach to find out what the actual causes are and fix things. I've said that this is exactly the same as you want to do when you try to handle a problem in business. But there's other elements in business because we've got many problems to fix at the same time. So think about what is it you really care about. Think about where are the opportunities for driving improvement. Think about who would fix the problems, how they would do it, and how you make sure you can deliver the benefits in time. Lean Six Sigma provides you with the structure and framework to address all of these challenges. So if anyone's interested, if this has piqued your interest a little bit more to find out more about Six Sigma, or you want to discuss this in the context of a problem that you may have just now, or you just want this presentation to, again, have a look through and see if it triggers any other thoughts, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'd be more than happy to have a discussion with you. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, your attendance, and your attention. And Adil, I'd like to hand control back to you for the Q&A.
Thanks, Dr. Charlie. As you mentioned, we are at the challenge time, so this is the best time to implement the Six Sigma. And as we understand that the benefits are huge in terms of customer satisfaction, cost reductions, and that will lead to revenue growth and so forth. We received an earlier questions that usually, which we understood from today's presentation, it applies a lot on the industrial sector, but also could be on the manufacturing sector, but it could also be on the service level. But how that you can conduct it? I mean, is it more kind of expensive or more difficult to do it on service level versus manufacturing?
No, it's interesting that there's plus and minuses in the way that you do different kinds of work, but the approach actually lends itself to any kind of environment. So in terms of delivery of services, the impact is immediate because you know that you're either using service slots and getting customers satisfied, or you don't. In a manufacturing sense, it's similar in a different way because you can walk around a facility and you can touch product, you can touch raw materials, you can touch WIP, and so you get to see things in a different way. And that's why Lean Six Sigma is so powerful, because it has underlying tools that allows you to apply the right tools for the right kind of environment and problem. And I think one of the issues that we often get is that people think that if they fix the problem one way in the past, they can fix any problem that way. Lean Six Sigma is highly flexible and adaptable in that way. If you don't take the right approach, you won't get the right solution. And there is an adage that says, if you've got a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. You want to try and avoid that. So I think the underlying tools and techniques, to answer your question, Errol, the underlying tools and techniques will help differentiate one problem environment from another. But the methodology itself still works, and the flow and the way it works covers equally across product development, manufacturing. It covers across service development, manufacturing.
Yeah. We also had another question prior to the session. So, what does it take to be certified? And the Six Sigma thing, is it something to do with the leaders should have it, or managers should have it, or both?
That's a great question. There is no formal qualification for Lean Six Sigma, but a number of different organizations will provide certification. So I've been certified through a number of companies that I've worked for. There is an emerging standard through the American Society of Quality, and there are ISO standards available. So there are companies, and my company is one of them, that can actually provide training, coaching and mentoring and delivery of projects based on a robust and compliant certification process. There are different levels of competence: yellow belt, green belt, black belt, then master black belt. Yellow belt allows individuals to fix problems in their own work environment and maybe work with one or two colleagues. Green belt takes that up a level and maybe has people working in departmental issues or fairly significant problems within the company. Black belt tends to be very complex, business-related problems that a business leader would care about. And a master black belt generally works on enterprise-wide issues or on issues that are fundamental to the strategy and delivery of benefits to the business. So there are different levels. I worked for a company, and I think we just about achieved the right benefit. When I joined the company, the number of yellow belts in the company were around about 22%. There was about 1,400 employees there. By the time I left, we were sitting at 97% yellow belts. And we had a translation rate of, for every 5 yellow belts, there was a green belt. And for every 10 green belts, we had a black belt. And what that meant was that we no longer needed to have a department that looked after Six Sigma, because the organization had it built into their DNA, and they were able to fix problems faster than another department could come and find it. And that gave a huge competitive edge. So that's an ideal state. My view, if you're starting off, to get some yellow belts, focus on a problem, bring someone in to help manage and coach these people to certification. Once you've proven the concept, think about taking some of the best yellow belts, make them green belts, so they can coach the yellow belts and bring some more yellow belts in and grow organically.
And I think that knowledge across the organisation shouldn't be underestimated. I think it's invaluable because I think, Charlie, as you said, this can be used, the toolbox can be used anywhere, service industry, manufacturing industry, anywhere. Key thing of it though is making sure it's got the commitment throughout the organisation to deliver it, because there are plenty of companies that will management level, senior level will say the words about improvement, but they don't really, they're just words. They're not really bought into the process of improvement. If you can have that knowledge through the organisation, that kind of overrides that words before action type methodology.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jim. It's a chicken and egg, because you can only get to that point if you've got strong leadership and sponsorship. But once you get to that point, you no longer need the sponsorship because it's just a way of working. But it's so important to make sure you've got key players at the start that make sure that you can drive change the right way, focus on the right thing. So even doing a small pilot at the start to get interest, to show the difference, to get people enthusiastic about being part of a winning team is so important. So one of the things I've not touched on, and Jim, your comments just reminded me of that. A key element in getting this right is making sure that you can manage people's expectations. It's about stakeholder engagement, communication. It's about managing change on a people level as well as a process level.
Yep, crucial.
Any further questions? Just a question for you, Dr. Charlie, is the three type of belts or the colors, that you mentioned, or is it more?
No, yellow, green, and black are pretty much standard. There's also a thing called white belt, but white belt tends to be more of a presentation. It's an education exchange with leaders to give them an understanding of what Lean Six Sigma is and what their responsibility would be. So to Jim's point about making sure that you've got leadership involved and people that can make things happen, white belt is generally about getting the leadership aligned about what can and can't be done and what is needed from an organization before you commit an investment in that organization to build this competence. But once that commitment is there, it's then a question of how many people do you need to fix things up at the lower level on a day-to-day basis? How many people do you need things fixed at a more complex level on a monthly to quarterly basis? How many people are working on the major initiatives that are going to change the business? And it's about getting that mix right and for it to be self-supporting. So black belts, coach green belts, coach yellow belts, and everybody starts to do this organically.
Thanks, Dr. Charles. So any further questions before we end this session today? We would like to thank everybody for participating for this webinar today. And don't forget us to follow us on the TCG social media. And please do not forget that we will send you feedback for this sessions and for the upcoming sessions. If you want to hear about a new subject, please let us know. And also we will have the recording of this one on the YouTube with the link provided after the session. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good day or afternoon or evening, wherever you are.
And thank you everyone for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks very much.